in Balpreet Singh. He's the legal counsel for the World Sikh Organization of Canada. He is in Toronto today. Mr. Singh, thanks for your time. Appreciate you standing by as we were talking to our correspondent there in Ottawa. Your reaction to these arrests?
No, it's a good first step, but there are a lot more questions that have been raised by these arrests than there are answers. Uh, it's actually interesting. Today we had the report by the Foreign Interference Commission come out, and Justice Hogue actually said in the report that India uses proxies based in Canada to conduct its foreign interference activities, and those are directed by Indian officials both in Canada and in India. So that seems to be what has happened here. These individuals are reported to be part of a gang called the Bishnoi Gang. Uh, Lawrence Bishnoi is the leader of this gang, and he's been in Indian prison since 2014.
Mm.
But at the same time, he still appears on Indian television quite often to give interviews in which he says he's an ardent Indian nationalist. He opposes Khalistan. And it's weird that India would allow this. And the fact that he might be implicated here in the murder of a Canadian citizen, all the more bizarre. But if you look back, you'll see that he's also been implicated in a string of extortion rackets in 6 different Canadian cities. How is India allowing a criminal in prison to run this sort of a network?
I guess one possibility is that they are working with him or some of his network in order to achieve their aims, if that turns out to be the case, Balpreet.
That would be the suspicion that India has a nexus with these criminal gangs and uses them to do its dirty work, which is absolutely unacceptable. So we're looking for more information, but the trail should not end with the shooters or with this gang. We need to know who directed them, and all signs are pointing towards the Indian consulate and embassy.
We know that India considers the Khalistan movement to be completely unacceptable. They called Mr. Nijjar a terrorist and others terrorists. They have been very angry with the Canadian government, Balpreet, as you know, for years, saying, look, you should not be allowing these, Sikh terrorists to organize on Canadian soil. They're trying to undermine Indian sovereignty, and this has been a huge issue, a constant source of irritation going back many years. In fact, there was this Khalsa big rally in Toronto recently. We just talked about our correspondent, Jeremy, about that. Again, the Indian government was very upset that the Prime Minister showed up at that. For people who are not as familiar as you are with what's going on, can you walk us through why this makes India so upset?
So Khalistan refers to a sovereign Sikh state. Sikhs had a sovereign Sikh state until 1849. And then the British annexed it, and when they left in 1947, which is 98 years later, they divided Punjab, which was the Sikh state, between India and Pakistan. And since then, Sikhs have been wanting to have their state back, where they can live freely. And of course, we've had interceding events like the Sikh genocide in 1984, mass discrimination, etc., etc. But India refers to anyone who supports Khalistan as an extremist or a terrorist. And that's really been the confusion for the mainstream. They will refer to anyone that peacefully advocates for Khalistan as a terrorist. Now, we have the Quebec separatist movement here in Canada. It's unimaginable that the Canadian government would crack down, assassinate, arrest individuals who support a sovereign Quebec. You can disagree with them, but you don't try and kill or destroy their movement. But India doesn't seem to understand that, and they've gone beyond their own borders, and there have been tens of thousands of Sikhs who've been killed for being supporters of Khalistan there, to actually targeting Sikhs outside. So Hardeep Singh Nijjar was one of several Khalistan supporters and advocates who were killed last year, and that's suspected to be the work of Indian intelligence agencies.
I know that he also was involved in the idea of organizing, a referendum here in Canada as well, Balpreet, to try and get a sense of what the Sikh community in Canada may think about the idea of of an independent, separate Khalistan within India as well. Would they have perceived that as a huge threat? Is that one of the reasons why? And we know he was on sort of a terrorist list.
Yeah, absolutely. So Hardeep Singh Nijjar was targeted because he was organizing a referendum on the question of Khalistan. Imagine that. The definition of democracy is voting and expressing your opinion, but India has repeatedly demanded that Canada not allow these events to happen, and then went so far as to kill the organizer. Imagine trying to kill Jacques Parizeau when he was trying to organize the 1995 Quebec referendum. It just boggles the mind. India refers to itself as the world's largest democracy. But to be frank, it lacks those democratic values that we understand here in the West.
Yeah, we know, of course, that there are elections going on currently within India. You're familiar. Your thoughts on what the Canadian government should do about all of this, Balpreet? And, again, we just want to be careful here. All we know is the arrests have been made. They've been charged, these three men, with first-degree murder and a conspiracy surrounding that murder, that assassination. But we don't necessarily have conclusive links to the Indian government, certainly being suggested, and the Prime Minister made that suggestion as well back in September. But, what now?
So, like I said, there's a lot more questions that need to be answered. And we need to look at this development here in Canada in the context of what's happening in the rest of the world. So, the US has unsealed its indictment in which there was a murder plot against Gurpatwant Pannu, who is the head of the organization that's leading these referendums and was a friend of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. And in that, it would suggest that the highest levels of the Indian government were involved in an assassination plot on US soil that was foiled. You have the Australian government revealing this week that a network of spies, they called it a nest of spies, was thrown out and identified in Australia. So here in Canada, identifying this hit squad is one step, but we need to know who is directing them. And like I said, all signs are pointing towards the Indian embassy and consulate. Now, I understand that all those who are involved may no longer be in Canada or may not have been Canada to begin with, but they need to be identified. Canada has been soft on Indian interference for the past 4 decades, and the brunt has been felt by our community. There's stuff as innocuous as denials of visas, but we also see things like electoral interference and now murder. So Canada needs to be strong. It needs to identify those who are involved, and we need to see more transparency. And definitely, it would be a positive step if we brought to justice those who directed these killings.
Balpreet Singh is legal counsel for the World Sikh Organization of Canada. He is in Toronto today with his take on this breaking news. Balpreet, thank you for making time for CTV News. As always, much appreciated.